This is an absolutely free course, and in this course, we are going to build a real-time chat application with Blazor and SignalR. So on the client side, we're going to have Blazor WebAssembly as the technology. And on the server side, we're going to use a generic ASP.NET Core application in order to host the SignalR hub. And on the client side, we're going to use the SignalR client NuGet package in order to establish connection with the hub on the server side. This is going to be a really practical guide for you to use Blazor WebAssembly and learn to use SignalR to create a real-time application. Before we go into the course, allow me to demonstrate this final product. I have 4 different browsers to represent 4 different users having conversations with each other. For example, the first one is Frank. So I can choose different users. Any username would do. And the second one, let's say James. Third one, let's say Will is here. And the last one, let's say Tom is here. And this is a system message telling me that I am Frank. It's confirmed that I have logged in. And same here, I'm James. It's confirmed that I have logged in. And if I want to talk to anyone, just click on the name. So for example, as Frank, I want to talk to James. So I say, hi James. It gives me a sound notification. At the same time, James on this side is receiving a visual notification. It tells me that I have an unread message and just one unread message. But if I keep entering the messages, I say, hi James, I am Frank. And then you can see that the number increases. But as soon as I click on this, the number disappears because I'm seeing both of the messages. And then I can reply, hi Frank. Right? At this moment, if Will is trying to talk to Frank, then Will is going to say whatever, right? And then you can see that Frank receives 2 notifications. One is from James because James just replied. And the other one is from Will because Will just sent a message to Frank. So Frank at this moment can choose to have a conversation with Will. And let's say he says, hi Will, where are you? And at this time, if he wants to switch back to continue the conversation with James, he can do that. Once he does that, you can see the notifications here disappeared. And of course, this guy can also talk to anyone. Right, let's say he talks to James and saying, hi James, happy B-Day. And then James can talk to Tom. Thanks, Tom. Like this. So you can see that this is not a full-featured chat application, but it includes a lot of functionalities, including visual notifications, sound notifications, and a pretty good-looking chat component right here, which is created with Reader component in Blazor WebAssembly. Okay, without further ado, let's get started with the first lesson in this course. Let's first talk about how a SignalR channel app works. A SignalR channel app is a client and server application. Of course, it's going to have a client and a server. And in order for the client to talk to the server, there's going to be a SignalR channel established between the client and the server. A SignalR channel is basically a WebSocket channel, and I'm going to use this pipe-shaped rectangle to represent the SignalR channel. A SignalR channel is basically a WebSocket channel, which provides a simultaneous two-way communication channel over a single TCP connection. So it's simultaneous two-way communication channel, which means that a message can be initiated from client to the server and from the server to the client, which is different from a typical HTTP connection, for example. In the case of HTTP connection, the client is the browser, and then the browser would send a HTTP request to the server, and the server returns a HTTP response. So the message is always initiated by the client, whereas with SignalR channel, message can be initiated from both client and the server. When we have a chat application, typically there are multiple clients instead of just one client. So it would look something like this. You have 3 different clients. Of course, there could be thousands of or even hundreds of thousands of clients to connect to a server. When we say there is a chat message going on, we usually refer to one client sends a message to another client. In a SignalR chat application, the message cannot go from the client directly to another client and backward like this. There's no connection between clients. Connection established between the client application and the server application. In order to send a message from this client to this one, this client has to send a message to the server, and then the server will forward the message to the client. And then the reply of that message also goes from this client, right, to the server, and then the server forward the message back to the first client. And in .NET, when we establish a SignalR connection and try to use that connection to send message between the client and the server, we use the hub connection class on the client side, and we use the hub class on the server side. And you would think there's only going to be one hub instance on the server, and then there's going to be many hub connections for each client to connect to the hub like this, but that's incorrect. On the server side, there's actually one hub instance per connection. So in this case, when we have 3 different clients with 3 different instances of hub connection, there's also going to be a corresponding hub instance on the server for each connection. So that's how SignalR application works. You mainly work with these 2 classes, the hub connection and the hub. And then there's going to be event hooks that you can set up in order to react. So this is how SignalR application works. You mainly work with the hub connection class on the client side and the hub class on the server side. Now let's actually jump into Visual Studio and start creating a SignalR-based real-time chat application. Let's go to Visual Studio. Let's try to create a new project. And the first application we're going to create is going to be the server application. Right? We can call it a hub server, for example. And for that, we're going to use ASP.NET Core empty because we're going to use basically a web application to host the hub. I'm going to call this project hub server, but the solution is going to be SignalR chat app. And we're going to use the latest .NET framework and then click on the create button. Let's close this window and go to Solution Explorer. First thing first, we want to add a NuGet package. So let's right click on this project and go to Manage NuGet Packages and then go to Browse. We're going to search for SignalR. And what we want to use is this Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.SignalR. This is going to help us to create a SignalR server application based on ASP.NET Core. We're going to select latest stable version and click on install. And I accept. Now, as we mentioned in the diagram, the server side works with the hub class. And we are going to create a hub class right now. So let's go ahead and add a new class. And let's call it Chat Hub. The Chat Hub class is going to derive from the hub class. It has a red squiggly line because it doesn't recognize it. We have to import a namespace. We're going to do a control dot, hit enter to import namespace, which is automatically added on the top. So the chat hub works on the server side. Whenever there is a connection that is started from the client side, an instance of this chat hub class is going to be created. And therefore, there is going to be a life cycle for the object that corresponds to the chat hub class. Because of that, we have some life cycle events that we can override. So for example, the first one that is most important is the unconnected async. And of course, we have a undisconnected async as well. Let's for now only focus on the unconnected async. So this lifecycle event is called when the connection is established. And when the connection is established, we have access to the context object. You can see Visual Studio is suggesting me to do this. And I'm going to actually do this. So the context basically contains a lot of information about the client. Right, so in this case, it displays the connection ID. So if we go inside here, you can see that we have connection ID. We have the user information. Okay, so this user information, so let me actually remove the rest. So what is the type of this user information? You can see this is a claims principle. If you have knowledge about ASP.NET Core authentication and authorization, you know the claims principle is basically a security context that represent the user who has logged on. So we can get user information from the context. One of the main thing is actually the connection ID. Whenever there is a connection that is started from the client, each client will be given a connection ID. You can see this is actually a string. It's basically a random string. It's definitely unique for each client. So now we created this chat client class here. We need to configure our hub server to actually support SignalR. So let's go to program.cs. This is where we configure. So by default, this empty web application for ASP.NET Core supports this minimal API type of code here. We don't need this. We need to create SignalR server application. So therefore, we need to configure the application to support SignalR. So what we need to do, instead of like this map get, we're going to say map hub. And we need to provide the hub class. In this case, it's called chat hub. And we're going to do a control dot, import the namespace, which comes from hub server. And we give it a URL, which means that when this ASP.NET Core web application runs, and when the user connects to this /chat hub URL, I'm going to use actually lowercase. Doesn't matter, you can use uppercase, but I think it's more natural to use lowercase as a URL. Whenever the user connects to /chat hub, an instance of this chat hub class is going to be created, and then this lifecycle events is going to be executed. Right? That's because we put our chat hub class type over here. So here we say map hub, but on the top, before we call builder.build, we need to do dependency injections in order to support SignalR. And all we have to do is to say builder.services.add SignalR. So this add all of the services that a SignalR application requires. Right? So here, basically, you consider this is a middleware that supports the hub connections. And here is all of the dependencies that the hub connection middleware requires. All right. So we have our server created. Now we can move on to the next part, where we are going to create a Blazor web application as the chat client. So let's go ahead and create add new project. And we're going to select Blazor web app and click on next. And then here, we're going to say Blazor chat app. I'm calling it chat app instead of chat client because later you will find out that there could be a confusion if I call it client. So let's click on the next button. And I'm going to still use .NET 9, and I don't need authentication for this video. And I'm going to configure for HTTPS. And I'm going to use interactive render mode. I'm going to use WebAssembly. Okay, so inside here, select WebAssembly. And then interactivity location, I'm going to use global, which means that for every single component in the Blazor WebAssembly application, it's going to be using WebAssembly instead of Blazor server-side rendering or interactive server. So let's select this, include sample pages, and click on the create. Now we have actually not one application, but two Blazor application created. And one of them is called client. That is the reason why I didn't want to call it Blazor chat client, because it's going to be a little bit confusing. Here we have this client application that includes all of the WebAssembly components, whereas we have this Blazor application that is the main application that is actually hosted on the server side. Well, when I say on the server side, I mean that it by itself is a web application, so therefore there is a server, but when there is a browser that connects to this server, all of the components here, right, it's going to be actually downloaded to the browser as a WebAssembly. So eventually you're going to have all of the codes run inside the browser. So essentially the browser will become the client, and then our server is going to be this hub server. So we want to have the chat client resides within the browser, and we want to use Blazor's WebAssembly to host those components that represents the chat client. So if you're feeling confused about this, you can go ahead and look at my Blazor videos, and I have a couple of courses, especially a deep dive course for Blazor application for you to learn about Blazor. Now we have created these two Blazor applications. Know that most of our work is within this client side application, because only within here you can create WebAssembly components. So let's continue to work on preparing this project. Let's open up the pages folder. We don't want to have the weather page and the counter page. Let me actually set this project to be the startup project. So this project is going to work through this project in order to actually host the Blazor WebAssembly project. So let's actually run it, and then you will see how it looks right now. And then we're going to remove some of the pages in order to prepare for creating our chat application. Now you can see we have our Blazor chat app displayed here, and this is a WebAssembly application. Let's close this and let's go back over to Visual Studio here, and what we want to do is to actually remove both the weather and the counter page because we don't need them. We only need the home page in order to use it to chat with someone. And also let's go into layout and go to main layout over here. We want to remove this sidebar here. We don't need the navigation menu on the left hand side. We only need this main area that has the body placeholder where we're going to see most of our components. So in order to finish this section, we are going to also go to the main application over here and open up the components, and then let's go to this app.reader component here. This is the root component, and you can see that we're using interactive WebAssembly render mode here. Here I want to change it to say, yes, I'm going to use interactive WebAssembly render mode, but I want to make sure that pre-render is turned off because we are going to focus on creating a chat application. We don't want to use pre-render to confuse us. Okay, so the preparation is done. Now we can work with the Blazor application to actually establish a SignalR channel. And in order to do that, first we come to our client application here. This is the main part, as I mentioned. This is the main project that we're going to work with in order to create the chat client. So here we're going to right click on dependencies and then manage NuGet packages. And we're going to go to browse, and we are again going to search SignalR. And this time we are installing SignalR.client. So this package. So select the latest stable version and click on the install button. And I accept. Okay, package is installed. Now we can go ahead and try to establish connection. So where do we do that? Let's go to the home page over here. And let's change this page title to chat app, and let's actually delete. We're going to add a C# code block here, and then we're going to override a lifecycle event for this WebAssembly component. I'm going to say override, and then I can say on initialize async, and then inside the lifecycle event, I'm going to try to establish the connection. So in order to establish connection, I'm going to say var hub connection equals new hub connection builder, and you're gonna see right squiggly line because namespace is not added yet. So I'm gonna do Control dot to import it. So now it's gonna show up on the top. Of course, I can move this to be centralized. So I'm gonna add it over here. I'm gonna say using, and then I'm gonna come back and delete this. Now I'm going to connect. So this is automatically generated, and it's imagining that I have this chat server side within the same application, but it's wrong. I have my client in a separate application. So I'm going to delete this, and I'm going to say HTTPS. This is going to target the chat, the hub server application. And where is that? It is right here. So this is also a web application, right? And URL that is being used right here, at least for debugging, is within the launch settings over here. And you can see that it is this port number 7028. So I'm going to come over here, and actually I'm going to replace this. And as what we have set up over here in the program.cs, the URL that's going to be mapped to the chat hub class instance is /chat hub. So that's why I'm going to come over here and say chat hub and say /chat hub. Okay, now that I have this hub connection, what I can do is I can say hub connection dot start async. So I'm starting the connection, which means that I'm trying to establish the connection. And this is a async method. So I'm going to use the await keyword here and the async keyword to enable. Okay, so we have created this lifecycle event for this home page. It is also a Razor component. So which means that when the Blazor application runs and when user comes to the /, which means the home page, this lifecycle event is going to be executed, and when it executes, a hub connection is created, and it's established between this Blazor application and the server application, which is right here. And that means if we want to test it, we need to make sure that both the server-side application and the client-side application actually runs. And that's what we are going to do right now. So right-click on the solution, and then we're going to say configure startup project. So right now it is a single startup project, which is the Blazor application. Now we're going to check this, and then we're going to make sure that the hub server is start and Blazor chat application also has start. And we also want to make sure that hub server is on the top, which means that the hub server is going to start first and then the Blazor chat app, right? Because we don't want to have a situation like this. So when the Blazor chat app starts first, it's going to try to establish connection right away. When that happens, if the hub server hasn't been created yet, then there's going to be a problem, right? That's why we want the hub server to start first. And then let's click on the OK button. Now we can give it a try. Let's just make sure that actually we're going to set a breakpoint right here. And then we are also going to set a breakpoint right. Okay. Now let's click on the start button to run in debug mode. So both applications will be started. So from these console applications here, which represents both ASP.NET Core application, you can see we have the server side running and we have the client side running. But if we go to the client side over here, you can see that we have a problem. So let's bring up the developer tool and check what the problem is. Because the WebAssembly application only runs on the client side, so you can only see the problems within the developer tool here. And let's go to console, and then you can see that it's having a problem trying to access the server side from the client side. Well, that's as reminded by the error message, we didn't set up course policy. Course policy stands for cross-origin resource sharing. So let's close this and let's close this. So the reason why we're having this problem is because the server side is ASP.NET Core application and the client side is also ASP.NET Core application. And when the client side is trying to contact the server side, by default, we don't allow another application with a different domain name to contact our server application. Right? Because if you go to launch settings over here, you can see that the server application is hosted on 7028 and the client application is hosted on a different port. So let's go to launch settings. The client application is hosted on 7057. And these are considered two different domain names. So in order to make sure that the hub server accepts any connections that comes from this domain name, we have to actually add a course rule. So let's go to program.cs and then let's go over here, enter the part we can add a use course middleware, and at the top where we can dependency inject, we can first of all dependency inject the add course, and then we can configure it. So it's already provided some code for me. I'm going to accept this. So this basically says that I allow any origin, which means that anybody can contact me. That's not really safe, right? We're going to still apply limitations, but we are going to only accept client from certain origins. I'm going to say with origins, and then we're going to say, I think it's 7028. So this is the, this not 7028. I think it's 7057. Let's go to the client launch settings. So you can see this 7057, right? So we're using 7057 and it has to be a HTTPS connection. Okay, so by doing this, we're allowing that the client that comes from this particular domain. So let's actually run the application again, and hopefully this time it works. Okay, server-side application runs, but because this is a WebAssembly application, so therefore debugging is a different story. I forgot about it, so we don't actually have to debug. Let's just run this. But the server side, once the client side starts the connection, this lifecycle event is triggered and the server side runs this. And if we just let it go through, we will find on the server side, it says client connected, and this is the connection ID. This is unique to the client. This finishes this particular lesson. Let's move on to the next one, where we're going to send a message from the server to the client. So far in our application, we are establishing a connection from the client to the server. Once the connection is established, From the server side, we're doing basically nothing, but only writing out a message to the console. What we actually want to do in the chat application is that whenever there is a client connected, we want to notify the client that you are connected. So in this lesson, we are going to try to do that. So as we mentioned in the first video, where we have this diagram, for each connection, there's going to be a SignalR channel established. And we also mentioned that this SignalR channel establishes a simultaneous connection, which is a two-way connection. The message can be initiated from either client side or the server side. And for each side, we have this send async method that we can use. So let's jump into Visual Studio here and let's try to target the client. So right now, we are on the server side. In order to target the client, we have to have a handle to the client. We're going to say client do something, right? So we're going to do that. We're going to say client. And as you can see, we have this client object we can use. And with the client's object, we can target all of the clients. Remember that this is the server. This is the hub server, right? And there can be thousands of or 100,000 of clients connect to the server. Although this object is a unique instance for each connection, but we can still target all of the clients. So in this case, we can say clients.all.send async. This means that we're trying to target all of the clients, but we can also target specific clients. For example, if we're only interested in talking to the caller, then we can use clients.caller. And also we can use the client method. And then we pass in the connection ID. In this case, we're targeting a specific client with the connection ID. But in this case, we're going to talk to the caller because we're going to tell the caller that you have successfully established a connection. So we use this send async method to target a specific method on the client side. And that method name is basically the first parameter, right? And here is basically it's generated this. But I don't want to call it receive message because receive message is too generic. I want to call it receive system message because a system message basically is saying that this is a message that is sent by the system, which is this instance of JetHub, to notify you about something. Well, this is different from the message that is sent from another client. That's why I call it system message, to distinguish the differences. And here we can have a very generic message. We can say that you have just connected, or maybe we can be more fancy. We can say, hi, we don't know how to identify the user, but what we can do is to use this context object. This context object help us to identify the user, and we're going to use this connection ID to identify it. So remember that the client side just established a connection, and then this lifecycle event runs. Anything that is within this context actually refers to the client, and this connection ID is basically the connection ID between the client and the server, right? This uniquely identify the SignalR channel between this specific client and the server. So therefore, we can basically say this, hi, this, and you have just connected. And we need to add a period here. Eventually, we're going to have a username, but that's probably in the next video or the one after next. Here, we're using the send async method, and therefore, we're going to have a async keyword, and then we use await. So we're triggering this receive system message by the send async. And later, you will see the same pattern from the client to the server. We also have a send async method, and then we can trigger a method that is defined on the client side. So here we don't need to use the return, so we can delete this one. Now, since we're targeting this particular method, we have to define this method on the client side. So let's go to the client side, which is basically this home component. And then over here, we can have a private void method, and we're going to receive a message. Now, if I create a method like this, how does the SignalR channel know that this method is defined right here instead of I can create two, for example, receive system message 1, receive message 2. So I have two of them. So how does the connection know which method to use? Well, I have to register this method with the connection. So let's delete one of them. We don't need two. So here, before we start async, I can register this method with the connection. And you can see that actually the Visual Studio is smart enough to know that I'm trying to register the method with the connection. And it's actually generated suggested code. I'm going to just use this. So this is the name of the method, and this is the method itself. So now, because I registered this, now the server side is able to target this method. Otherwise, it won't be able to find the method. Okay, so now let's run the application again. Now you can see that we have a empty page. Well, that's because we do have an empty page. But when this page is loaded, the uninitialized async method is called. So the connection is created. So which means that this method should be already triggered by the server. So how do we know that? We come to this client application, we open up developer tool, and then we come to the console. You can see that right here it says hi, right? It says hi, whatever you have just connected. It works, but we don't want to just display it right here. We want to display it inside the browser over here. So how do we do that? Let's stop debugging and let's come to the top of the code block. Let's first of all declare a system message. So I'm going to say string, a list of string, and then I'm going to say system messages equals new list. And then when I receive a message, I'm going to come over here and I'm going to just add the message to the list. But we want to make sure that the message is not now. I'm going to move this inside it. So only when the message is not now do we actually add the message to the system message list. So now that we have the system message list, we can display a component over here. Well, you can see that Visual Studio is trying to generate a whole block of HTML for me. I don't need that. I only need an order list. I want to display it in a very basic format, and then was already generated code for me, so I'm going to use that. So for each message in the system messages, display the message. Okay, but I want to be safe, so I'm going to say if messages is system messages is not null, and if system messages count is greater than 0, then I display this unordered. Okay, with the change, let's run the application. Now you can see that we don't actually have a message displayed here. So why is that? Let's stop debugging. Remember that this is Blazor application, and this receive system message is only called after the server responds. By that time, the markup on the top is already rendered, and then it determines that the system message count is basically 0. So it's not actually doing anything, right? It's not displaying that. So how do we make sure the message is actually displayed? We can come over here and we can say state has changed. So state refers to these state variables. And when the state variable changes, we need to re-render the application. We can use state has changed method to tell Blazor that, hey, re-render the markup for me. That's why we're doing this. And now if we run the application again, you will be able to see the message for sure. All right, you can see this message displayed right here. Hi, blah, you have just connected. Okay, that's what we're going to cover in this lesson. Let's continue to the next one. So far in our chat application, we have been establishing a connection, and then we're receiving the message from the server side. And once we receive the message, we display the system message. But when we establish the connection, we didn't tell the server who we are. For a chat application, the server needs to know who has connected. In this part of the video, we are going to work on collecting the user information and then send the user information to the server side when we try to establish the initial connection. In order to collect that user information, we need to collect it before the connection is established. And for that purpose, we're going to create another component. We are only going to display that component to collect the user information when the user information is missing. Let's go to Solution Explorer, and then again, let's use this client project here. And we are going to create a component. Therefore, I'm going to create a new folder, and then I'm going to call it components. So enter this folder. I'm going to create our first Razor component. A Razor component is basically a Blazor component. It's just called Razor component. Here, I'm going to call it user info collection component. You can call it anything, but this long name indicates the purpose. And I would change the title. I'm going to say enter your information or enter your info. And then over here, I'm going to create a class. And this class is just a class that contains user information. For now, we are only collecting the username. And later, if you want to collect something else, for example, the avatar of the user, then you can collect it. So once we have this, we go to the top over here. We're going to create a user information object here. And we're going to bind this to our HTML markup. So first of all, we want to be defensive. We want to make sure that this is not now. Only when it's not now do we actually go ahead and display this markup, because this markup is based on the user information object. So I'm going to have a edit form, and this is a built-in component for collecting information from the end user. And you can see that Visual Studio already generated a whole bunch of stuff for me, so I'm going to accept it. But for some reason, it doesn't actually generate a complete HTML for me. So I have to complete it myself, which is fine. Fair enough. And of course, this user information is required. So we can use data annotation to make sure that user enters the username. And then of course, we have the validations components included automatically for me. And now I'm going to create an input field, and I'm going to use Bootstrap, and I'm going to use a row, and I'm going to have a margin bottom so that the two rows are not connected to each other. So I have a div here, and I'm going to have two columns. The one is for label, the other one is for the input. So I'm going to accept what's suggested to me by Visual Studio. And this seems to be pretty good. Yeah, I think the class is also correct. And ID class, this is correct. So we're binding to user information. That's all correct. And I'm going to create my next row. And in here, I'm going to delete this label. I don't need this either. So what I need here is actually a button, which is to submit the edit form. So type is submit, class is primary. That's okay. Seems to be pretty good. And once this button is clicked, the form is submitted. So we need to react to that form submission. And I'm going to say on valid submit, and then I'm going to say save user info. And then I can go to my C# code over here. I'm going to create this private void save user information. So how do I save the user information? Well, the user information that is collected will be used in the parent control. So therefore, I'm going to create an event callback and send this user information back to the parent component or the parent page. So first of all, it has to be a parameter. It has to be a public property. So it's an event callback, and the thing that I want to send is basically just a string which represents the username. So I'm going to say on user info saved. And then over here, I can just say, I'm just calling on user information saved. And I'm calling invoke async, and I'm passing the username over to it. But because this is async, so I can choose to use a wait, and then I can use async keyword to enable a wait. And then I'm calling this properly. Over here, I want to initialize this to empty string just to be extra safe. All right, I think we have our component created properly. Now we can use this component to collect user information on the home page. So let's switch to the home page over here. And then on the top over, yeah, it's right on the top. Below this, we can say if string dot is null, We don't need the hash sign over here. So I'm gonna say string dot is null or empty rep is null or white space. Then, so we're gonna have a username private field, which we're gonna declare later. So if the username is empty or white space, then we're gonna show this user information collection component. And I'm gonna delete this part, and I'm gonna go to imports to centralize this. So I'm gonna say add using and then the namespace. Then when I come back, you can see this is color coded already. So here, because the event callback is a parameter, so I'm gonna implement this. And then I'm basically just going to create another method and have the same name. And then I'm going to go down over here to implement the method. So I'm going to say private void and then string username. Now we need to declare that private field, and we can come on the top. We can say private string initial value is empty, and username by itself is probably not enough because different users can have the same name when they try to enter their username, right? So because of that, we are going to have a user ID, and I'm also going to initialize it with empty string. So once this method is triggered by the event callback from the component, well, I think this name doesn't look so good. So let me actually change this and say on user information provided. Okay, so this is provided from the internal component. So once it's provided, I'm going to say this username equals username. So I'm going to remember the name that is passed in from internal component. And then here, I'm going to say the user ID equals, I'm just initializing a random GUID. And only after this do I actually try to connect the remote hub server. So which means I'm going to create a private method for that purpose. So I'm going to call it, I know I'm going to use this async method. So I'm going to have async and then task. And I'm going to say connect to server, and I need to tell the server about the user information, which includes the user ID, the username, and I'm going to just move this over here, and I'm actually going to delete this uninitialized async because we don't need it anymore. Now, how do I pass the user information to the remote server? The easiest way to pass the user information to the remote server is to use query string here. So I'm going to say user ID, and then I'm going to say username, and then with curly braces, and then I can feed the user ID and the username in different curly braces. And then later we can work on the server side to actually extract these information from the query string. But for now, let's go back and try to implement this method. So once these two properties are assigned, then we can try to call this new method connect to server. So with user ID and name. Okay, and this is async method, so I'm going to use await over here, and then I'm going to change this one also to async task. And I think we have done our work on the client side, except that I think here we need to add an else statement. Only when we have the username do we actually want to display any other HTML markup. Otherwise, the user will have to be forced to enter the user information. So now I think I have completed the work on the client side, and we can move on to the server side. Let's go to Chat Hub. And on the Chat Hub, first of all, before we actually send the information to the client, we need to collect user information. So I can say user ID equals to, and then I have this context. So we have talked about this context before, but let's actually hover the mouse over it. You can see that the type of this context is called hub caller context. So hub color context, obviously this means that this context is all about the color. There's a method under this, it's called getHttp context. Let's recall what we have talked about before. So this SignalR connection is a TCP connection. It is not a HTTP connection. Then why it actually can give us the HTTP context? Well, it's not a HTTP connection, but it starts with HTTP. By looking at the client side, you already know this because you can see that we're providing a URL. Everything starts with a HTTP. So what happens is that a WebSocket connection, which is basically a SignalR connection, right? A WebSocket connection, it all starts with a HTTP connection, right? This HTTP connection is used to do the initial handshake. And then the connection will be updated or upgraded to a WebSocket connection, which is a TCP connection. So again, it starts with HTTP connection. That's the initial handshake. And then both parties agree to upgrade to a TCP connection, which is the eventual WebSocket connection, also called SignalR connection in .NET. Again, let's go back. That's enough about this theory. And let's try to get the query string here. So we get the user ID and we also want to get the username. So I'm going to just duplicate this. I'm going to change this to name and also change this one to name. Well, I have done this work before, right? I have prepared my code, I've run it, and when I do that, I found that this doesn't work. And for some reason, I couldn't tell for what reason. If I declare it this way, right? If I do it this way, and then I assign it like this, then it's going to work. Otherwise, it just doesn't work, and the code runs over here, and the rest of the code won't be executed. And it doesn't even tell me what the problem is, or maybe I don't remember what problem it told me. It just doesn't work. So I found a solution. I just declare these variables ahead of the time before I do it. Okay, so then it would just work. So now I have the user ID and username. What I can do for now, at least in this video, I'm going to just output them, making sure that I've collected the user information correctly. And then we can run our application. Let's click on the start. All right, we have our user collection component over here. I actually don't like this. This is too big. So let's actually fix it. Let's stop it. And then let's go to our user information collection component. I think I'm going to change this one to 2. And I'm going to change this to 6. This to 2 and this to 6. I think that would look better. And let's run it again. I'm not actually sure whether this has changed. So I think I changed it wrong. I shouldn't change this margin bottom. It should be here. So column 2, column 6, column 2, column 6. That's correct. And let's run it again. Okay, that's much better. And I'm going to enter my own name here. And if I go over here, one of them is, so this is the client side and this one is the server side. And if I move this over here and this one to the right, and now I'm going to click on the submit button, and immediately you can see that server side received the message. It says user Frank with the ID blah. And on the client side, I also received the system message. And that's great. This finishes this part of the video. We'll continue from the next one. In this lesson, we're going to work on maintaining a user list on the server. So first of all, why do we need to maintain a user list on the server? Well, one of the most obvious reasons is that when we maintain a user list on the server, then when any new user joined into this chat application, it will be able to receive the user list so that the new user knows who else are on the server. It's an important part of a chat application. So for that, let's go to our chat hub class, and we need to think about how we can maintain the user list. First of all, I need to create a connected user class in order to actually store information. And I know that that connected class will also be used on the client side, because when a new user joins into the server needs to update the user with the user list. And the client also needs that data structure. So therefore, I'm going to create the connected user class in a class library so that I can reference that from both the server and the client project. How do we name the project? I'm going to call it chat contracts. So first of all, it's a class library. And secondly, the name of the project is going to be called chat contracts. Of course, you can call it anything, but I think chat contracts, it reflects that it's a shared library by both the server and the client side. So I'm going to just create it. The first class, which is this class 1, I'm going to change the name to connected user. First of all, the user information from the client side when the connection is established. So we're going to have a user ID here. And secondly, we will have the username here as well. Now, thirdly, I'm going to have the user information from the server side. And one of the most important things is the connection ID. And last but not least, we will need to have a list of messages, right? Because each user will have a message with some other users, but we're going to work on that later. Okay, so we have our connected user. Now we can go back to our chat hub class here. So my question for you, now I need to create a list of connected users. So can I do this? Can I just say private and then list of connected user? Well, in order to use this, we need to add dependency and we need to add project dependency. And select chat contracts, click on OK. And then I'm going to do a control dot import namespace. All right. So now I have a connected users. Can I do this? This is the question for you. Well, the answer is we cannot do it. Remember in this diagram when we talk about how SignalR application works, we actually have one hub per connection, right? One hub instance per connection. So if you have this connected users, it's going to only survive in one connection. So when another user joins, this connected user property is going to be empty, right? So we cannot do that. Then how do we implement this? Well, we can implement in different ways. One of the easiest way is to use a static variable. So we have this static, and then we can use the connected users. So in order to make sure that we know this is a member of the class, I'm going to add an underscore here. And now we can work on add users into this connected users list. So where do we do that? Well, when the user just established connection, that's the perfect place where we can add the new user into the connected users list. And we can do that right here. So instead of just output this console, output the username and ID, we can actually use the username and user ID. I can say connected users dot add, and then I can create a new connected user, and it's already completed code for me. It knows that these are important information I can use right from here. And then it also knows that the connection ID can be grabbed from the caller context. You would think that this would be enough, right, to create a user list. Well, it's not. Why it's not? See, this is a static variable, which means it's going to be shared by all of these instances. And these instances are actually basically running simultaneously and separately. So this means that this is actually a multi-threading scenario, which makes this shared resource a resource that they might compete for. So therefore, the easiest way to solve this problem is to use a simple lock. So a simple lock in C# can be created as a just object. Right? So I can say lock. What kind of lock? This is for users. We're locking the users, the connected users list. So before I try to access the shared resource, I can say lock and then underscore lock users. I'm going to delete this automatically generated code, and then I'm going to put this one over here. So I think this is good enough. We receive user information here. we add the user information into an object. Right? We create an instance of this connected user object, and then we add this into the connected users list. We use the lock to protect the shared resource. And also, we send a message to the client side to indicate that the user has connected. And by the way, here, we don't have to use connection ID anymore. What we can do is that we can use the username. And since we're on the server side, another important thing is that we need to override the second lifecycle event, which is when the connection is disconnected. What do we need to do? So I'm going to remove this. I'm going to start typing myself. So when the user disconnects the connection, one of the ways to do that is just close the browser, because our client is a Blazor application and it runs inside a browser. So if I close the browser, the connection is automatically dropped. So when I do that, what should be happening on the server side? Well, of course, we need to remove the corresponding user from this connected users list. So how do we know which user to remove? So we need to find it first. So I'm going to have a user declared here. And then inside this connected user list, we need to find the user. So I'm going to accept the suggested code. Okay, and then we're going to go through this. So we created lock because we're trying to access the shared resource. So we create a lock first, and then we're trying to find the user whose connection ID is the same as the connection ID in the context. And if we have found the user, then we are removing the user from the list. So why did I declare this variable? Well, we will do something later. So if the user is not null, then of course we're not going to do this. We're not tell all of the clients. So here, look, here we can try to do this. We can try to send to the client a system message. We can say, hey, this user has left the chat. Well, it's kind of obvious if we are also maintaining a user list on the client side, and whenever the user drops the connection, the user list on the client side is updated, right? Then we don't have to send this system message. It's redundant. So here I'm going to say I want to update the client about the user list change, right? Because we have just changed the user list here, and we need to tell them, right? Tell the clients, well, not the client, but the clients. We want to tell all of them that the user list has changed. And here, what we can do is we can call the base on disconnected and pass the exception. I think we're good for this part of the video, and I'll continue from the next part, where we are going to actually create a user list on the client side to reflect all of the connected users. Alright, we're going to continue our video, and in this lesson we are going to actually transfer the connected users list from the server to the client side, so that the client, when the new user joins, the new user will be able to see the list of users who have already joined. And for that, remember, this is going to be a message initiated by the server, right? And whenever we initiate a message sending, we're going to use this send async from the server side. And this time, we're going to notify all of the clients, not just the caller, right? All of the clients that the user list has changed. So, so to do that, I'm going to come over here and, well, it's already generated some form of code. I'm going to accept it first, and then I'm going to change it. Okay. So it's already targeting all of the clients, and that's what I want, but not this method. I'm going to call it update, update user list. Okay. And all I need to send is the list of users, and I already have that, which is the connected users. So it's a simple method. So I need to do it here, but I also need to do it right here. We had a comment in the previous lesson. So I just need to call these two methods like this and point out the method name. Now we can work on the client side. I'm going to copy this into my clipboard, and then I'm going to go to the client side. Here, go to the home.razor component, which is actually, you can call it a page, but it's actually a Razor component. And then I can work on the update user list. So I'm going to create a private void update. Well, I'm going to use this update user list. So this, and the user list is basically a list of connected user, right? But this also comes from the contract project. I'm going to add a project reference. And right after that, I'm going to do a control dot to import the namespace. Here, this is users. And then I'm going to say if users is not now, and at the same time, users.count is greater than 0. So we want to be safe. So what do we do here? Well, we have the users list from the server side. We also need to maintain the user list on the server side. And for that purpose, let's scroll up to the top and we can create another variable here and say list of connected users. And we'll call it connected users, and I'm going to initialize it like this. And well, here, if I receive a user list from the server and it's not now and it's greater than 0, then I'm going to just basically swap this. Not swap, I'm going to just assign these users to the connected users. Now all of a sudden the client side has an updated user list. So this is the simplest way to do that. Right? And remember, we have to use state as changed because this connected user is a state variable to this component. Right? And when the server side pushes the message over, this method is executed, but the HTML markup is already rendered in the browser. So we want to use the state as changed method to actually re-render the part of the screen. And that's why we do that. And now we do have the connected users and it does update. But how do we use this? We need to use this to display the connected users. But where do we do that? Okay, so I'm going to do it right here under the else statement. And should I accept this? I'm going to create a row. Yeah, I'm going to create a row with actually 2 columns. And I'm going to accept this. I don't know where it gets the idea of the chat component, actually a good name. But for now, I'm not actually, yeah, it's actually not a bad idea. So we have a chat component on the right hand side, and we have a list of users on the left hand side. And the column is 4, and this column is 8. Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. But the chat component, we're gonna work, we're gonna work on later. So we're gonna delete this and leave this as a placeholder, and then we're gonna close this div. So here, now the right hand side is going to, for now, display the system message, and the left hand side is going to be showing a list of connected users. And to do that, I'm not actually going to do it right here. I'm going to extract this right inside a component. So let's delete all of that, and then let's create another component. And then let's create another component. And I'm gonna call it connected users component. So right click on this, click a new user component, and it's called connected users component. So for this component, I'm now gonna have a title, and I need the connected users to be passed in first of all, right? So it's gonna be passed in through a parameter. And it's going to be a list of connected user. So do a control dot, import namespace. Maybe we can just take this whole thing and move it into the centralized place. Then when we come back, we can use the connected user, no problem. And then here, I'm going to say this is a connected users property. Now on the top over here, I can say if the connected users is not now and connected users dot count is greater than 0. Then I'm going to display a list, and I'm going to use table row, which means that from the outside I have to have a table, but we're going to work on that later. So here I'm going to say for each var user inside connected users, and then I have a table row here. So for this, I'm going to have the style, and when the user points to one of the connected user, I want to use pointer, which is basically a hand icon here, right? And I want to control the height of this to be 30 pixels. And another thing is I want to use a key to help to improve the performance. So here I can use the connection ID, or maybe I can use the user ID, right? Either way, it's fine. Well, I guess I can use connection ID. I think it's shorter. And then here I'm gonna have 2 table cells. So one of them displays the username, and the second one I'm gonna leave it as empty, and later we're gonna use that. Okay, so we have a problem here, a potential problem, because you see this connected user also includes the connection, includes the user that is already connected. So for example, I log in as Frank, right? I provide my user information, which is just the username. I provide my name here, and then the connection is established. So my user, which represents myself, is also going to be inside this list, which means that if I don't do anything, my own name is going to show up here, right? Which is kind of weird. I don't need to see my own name inside this connected user list. So because of that, I need to do something here. So I have to add an if statement. I'm going to say if the user.user ID is not the current user ID. So what is the current user ID? Well, I don't have that yet, but I'm going to say this.logon user, and I'm going to move this inside. And then we see this red squiggly line. We fix this. So go down, implement another parameter, and this is going to be passed in from outside. So whoever has logged on, we're going to have that. And we can declare it like this. Okay, so I think we are good with this. Now we can go back to the home component here, and we can use that. So we can use it like this. We can say connected user component, and it needs 2 parameters. So connected users, and this comes from this dot connected users, right? And the next one is logon user. So who's the logon user? We have this dot user ID. Is this a logon user ID? I think it would be user ID. So let's actually go inside. We're comparing user. I think I'm going to change this to be more specific. I'm going to say logon user ID, and then let's go back. So here, this is a logon user ID and equals to this dot user ID, and that's it. Right? But remember, this inside this component, it's a table row. So therefore, we're going to create a table. When it's a style, width is 100%. And then I'm going to move this inside it. So let's double check. So we have this declared over here. And I think it makes sense to double check the connected user information. So if the this.connected user information is not now, right? And do we need to double check whether the connected user is null or not? Well, let's go inside this component. We're already checking right here, so I think we don't need to check from outside. So when the connection is established, which means that this method is called and the update method is defined here in order to receive the connected users. But remember that this method needs to be registered to the connection, and we forgot to do that. So let's actually copy this and then duplicate it, and over here I'm going to change. So this refers to the method name and this is the delegate, right? But here we have a list of users as the parameter, so I have to also put this type over here. So this generic refers to the parameter type, and we only and we only have one parameter. What if we have two parameters? For example, if I have something like this, okay, then what I need to do is go over here. I define the second parameter's type like this, which corresponds to the second parameter type. Okay. But for this one, we only have one parameter, and we're good. Okay, I think we're good, and let's give it a try. Let's run the application in debug mode. Okay, our application is running. Let's create two instances. And we move this second one to the right hand side over here. And the first one, I'm going to say Frank. And the second one, well, thing is already showing my name here. That's pretty weird. We need to fix that problem. So here you can see that the users list are displaying for both sides. And this is what I want to avoid. So I am Frank on the left hand side, so it shouldn't show Frank, right? And I am Tim on the right hand side, so it shouldn't show Tim on the right hand side. So let's try to identify where the problem is. So on the client side, if I go to user information, not this one, connected user component over here. So only when the user is not equal to the logon user do we display this. And then, all right, in order to troubleshoot, what I want to do is I'm going to say, so just temporarily, I'm going to use the second TD. I'm going to say, I'm going to actually display the this dot logon user ID. Okay. And also on the server side, oh, I think I know why. Because we declare this logon user ID. Yeah, we're passing this. So this is actually correct. So how do we fix this? How do we troubleshoot here? So I'm gonna display the current user ID right here. I'm gonna say this dot user ID. Oh, I know why. Okay, I know why. We don't need to troubleshoot. So you see here, this logon user is of the type string. So therefore, this is not automatically considered as C#. This is considered as a string. So this string is this dot user ID. So basically, the logon user ID is at this time called this dot user ID. So that always happens when the type of the parameter is string. So in order to do what it's supposed to do, we need to do @ and this dot user ID. Why it says it doesn't contain it? Well, it's just because I used the wrong username. The parameter name. Okay, I think this solved the problem, and we can go back to over here and remove this. We're gonna leave the second cell empty. We're gonna use it for some other reasons. All right, so let's run the application again. Okay, we have the first one, And now I'm going to create a second instance of the client, and I move one of the instance to the left. And then again here, I'm going to log in as myself. And now I don't see my own name. Okay, that's pretty good. And then I log in as Tim. Now I can see Tim from my side, and Tim can see me. That's correct. So I'm going to add another one. I'm going to put this one on the top left corner, and this one on the top right corner. And I'm going to create another instance. I'm going to move this over here. And here I'm going to say my name is Will. So from Frank's side, so here this indicates the user, right? From Frank's side, I have Tim and Will. From Tim's side, I have a Frank and Will. And from Will's side, I have a Frank and Tim. So that's correct. That's exactly what I want to see. And we are finishing this lesson. I'm going to see you in the next one. In this lesson, we're going to use strongly typed client. If we go to the chat hub over here, so you can see that whenever I want to call a method on the client side, I have to just send async, and then the method of the client side has to be in a string. There is a way to actually change this in order to use a strong typed client. And the way to do that is to create an interface. And this interface basically has an abstract information about what kind of methods are available in the client. And where do I create that? Well, I can create it in the hub server, or I can use it in the chat contracts. I don't think that this interface actually belongs to chat contracts. I would still store the interface over there because it's just cleaner. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new class or a new interface. And I'm going to just call it iChat client. So this is the interface, and it's going to be public interface. So far what we have let's actually go to the chat hub. We have receive message and we have update user. So if I go to the client over here, I'm going to copy this into our interface, right? And then let's go to client side again. We have this update user list, and let's also paste it over here. Well, I need to remove this internal, and I think so far we only have these two methods, right? We're calling these two methods, and we're registering those two methods from the client side. Okay, so once I have this iChat client defined, what I can do is I can come over here when we define this chat hub class, and then in the base class here, I can provide a generic type here, and I can use my iChat client. And when I do that, you can see that I see the rescue line here. I can no longer use send async. So send async is not available anymore. But if I say dot, you can see receive system message is now available as a method. So I don't have to use a string to represent the method anymore, because this is not a async method. So I can remove the await. So same here, I have a update user list. So we have fixed that, and if we scroll down over here, we're calling this again. So let's copy just like this. Now our code is much cleaner, and let's try to, well, here there's a green squiggly line because we don't need the async keyword anymore, but because of that we need to return something. So I'm going to say task.completed task. All right, so now let's run the application, make sure everything still works. I'm going to create 3 different clients, and then I'm going to move this one to the left and move this one to the bottom left. So I'm going to enter different names here. So here you can see it says cannot generate proxy implementation for this. All methods must be task. So I have to use async. All right. So let's go over here. I'm going to change this to task, and then change this to task. And then I come over here. This time I'm going to use async keyword here, and I'm going to use await. Okay, and now I don't need to use the space over here. And for the same reason, we're going to go down over here and add the await keyword, and that's it. So now, although the return type is task, on the client side, the return type is void, but that's okay. I don't think that's going to be a problem. So let's run the application and prove that it's actually okay. Again, we're going to create 3 different clients. So let's say this one is Tim, Tom, and this one is Thomas. All right. Everything is working, right? For Tim, I have Tom and Thomas. For Thomas, I have Tim and Tom. And for Tom, I have Tim and Thomas. So everything is working properly, and I'll see you in the next lesson. So far, our application has a list, which is the user's list on the left. And then over here, we're just displaying the system message. So what's supposed to happen in this chat application is that when the user clicks on, for example, click on Tim, then on this right-hand side of this area, I need to see a list of messages between me and this user that I clicked on, and then a input box at the bottom where I can input the messages to chat with the user that I selected. In this video, we're going to work on that. So what I need to do is on this side, right, on this right-hand side, I need to display a chat message component. So let's close this, and then let's try to work on the chat message component. So again, let's go to this client project over here and try to create another Blazor component. And let's call it the chat component. And in this chat component, I do not need a title. First of all, for this chat component to display my message, it needs to display the message between me, who is the logon user, and the user that I target to. So because of that, first of all, I need to have parameters. So this parameter, first of all, gives me a from user ID, and then it also need to give me the connected user information, because this connected user needs to be able to store the messages between me, which is the from user, and the target user. Right. So far, our connected user doesn't contain the list of messages yet, but we're going to add that very soon. When we have these two, we can start writing the markup on the top. And say if the to user is not now, then what are we going to do? We can use the bootstrap card. And over here, I can use the card header. And I'm going to store a message. I'm going to say chatting with to user dot user name. Okay, and then I'm going to close this. Now over here, I'm not sure I'm going to use a card body, but I'm going to use a div that has an overflow and well, I can say auto to make it simple. And then the style here, I'm going to say minimum height is 200. And then inside it, I'm going to have an order list. Okay, and let's say this has the class list group. And now for each of the message, I don't have a message yet, so I'm just going to write it, and then I'm going to create it later. So I'm going to have a message list inside the user, and then I can display the message. But first of all, let's fix this red squiggly line, which means that we first of all need to create a class, which is a chat message class, and that should be under this chat contract. So let's go over here and try to create the chat message class, and this is going to be a public class, and the chat message should not only contain a string message, but also needs to know from which user to which user, right? That's pretty important. So I'm going to say string question mark and from user ID, and now I need to have the next one, which is the to user ID, and also I will have the actual message, and I'm going to have a boolean. So this one, what is this one? So this is unread, whether the user is unread or not. By default, it's going to be true when you just create a message unread. So now I have this chat message class. I can go to the connected user class, and then I need to create my list of chat message, and we call it messages, and I can initialize this by default. Alright, so I have this declared. I can go back to our chat component and continue. So for each message in the messages, I need to display something about the message. So I will use a li element, and then this is going to be list group item. Okay, I'm gonna use a deflex, and this is gonna align items start, and I'm gonna create my own class, which I'm gonna implement later. So this is my list, and then inside it, and I have a div, and this is where I provide the message. Okay, so I'm gonna say message dot the actual message, which is the string. So I can do that, but I also need to display from which user this message come from. For that information, I can get it from message, and then I can get it from user ID, according to this from user ID. But what is the username of this from user ID? In order to get it, we actually need to, well, let's actually delete it first to remove all of these 3 lines. So we need to have another parameter that's passing from outside, right? And this one will have our list of connected users. So I'm gonna say connected users, and then add a question mark over here. Then we want to be safe, and then say if connected users is not now, and at the same time connected users dot count is greater than 0. Then come over here, declare another variable, and then say var from user name equals to, let's see what code it actually automatically generates. So it's actually going to look for the from user. Okay, so I'm gonna use this code. It's actually pretty good code. And I have the from user, and this is the username. I want to display the username right here in bold. So I'm gonna say from username like this, and then I'm gonna add a line break like this. All right, now we have this area where the messages, the existing messages are displayed. Now let's create the footer. So this is the div footer. So I'm using this automatically generated code, and it looks somewhat correct. So we can continue from here. So first of all, it's a text box, and we can add a me2 class over here. And also I want to have a placeholder. So I'm going to say placeholder, and I'm going to say type your message here. Right? And this is going to bind to a message, and I'm going to say private string, I'm going to say new message. Okay, and it's a new message again. So this is going to bind to new message, and the way to bind it, so it's on event of input, and then I have a button here, and when the button is clicked, we need to send the message. So we need to implement this send message method here. So I'm going to say async task, because I know I'm going to have to use the hop connection in order to send it. Say send message, because I need to use the hop connection, and the hop connection can only be passed from outside. We cannot establish another connection, which is wrong, right? We already have a connection. So this is a parameter, and I'm going to say public and hop connection, and it needs to be passed from outside. So here, if I have a connection, right, and also we need to make sure we have a user to talk to. Okay, so that's why here it's a to user is not now, and at the same time, if new message, then we are going to send a message to the server. Remember, you can't directly establish connection with another client. You have to send it to the server, and then the server will forward that message to the target client. So I'm going to use the hop connection, and it has a invoke async, not send async, not send async. And which method are we going to invoke? We can call it send message, or we can call it forward message. I think calling it forward message makes a lot of more sense. So I'm gonna say forward message. And for this method, I'm gonna provide the from user ID, and I'm gonna provide the two users connection ID because I have it. And then I'm gonna provide the new message, and I'm gonna wait this. So here we send a message to the server, right? We send the message to the server, and we expect the message to be forwarded to another client. Once we send the message to the server, we also need to store the message locally. So we're gonna create a new chat message, not a message, a new chat message. And from user is from user. The to user ID is to user.toUser ID. Message is new message, and the Unread we can use the default value, which is true. Now we need to clear up something, right? Because we already sent a message to the server. So we're gonna say new message equals string.empty. So this will make the input box empty. And here, because this is an event, so an event will trigger a refresh of the markup. So we don't need to call state has changed over here. Okay, I think we are good, except that we can only call the send message by clicking the button. I also want to send a message when I hit enter. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say on key down, and then I'm going to say handle key press, and then I'm going to scroll down and implement that method. So I'm going to accept the automatically suggested code, and if key is enter, then I'm just going to trigger the send message method in order to send a message to the server and expect the server to forward the message to another client. So I think we're okay over here, but this forward method is not created on the server side yet. So let's go ahead and try to create that. Let's go to Chat Hub class over here, and let's scroll down over here. We can create a public async task, and instead of send message, I'm going to call it forward message, right? This has to match the component that we just created. So here we have from user ID, and then we have to connection ID, and we have message. Again, this sequence of parameter has to match the client side. So it generated the code for me. Let me see whether I like it or not. Yeah, I think I like it. Let me accept this. So let's take a look at what's generated. When the server received the message, it's supposed to forward it. But first of all, in order to forward it, it needs to find the user to forward to. It's going to look inside the connected users. It's going to find the user by using the connection ID. This makes sure that the user that is found is not now. And if it's not now, then it needs to forward the message to the target user. Actually, I don't need to find the to user because I already have the to connection, right? So I can delete this, and I can delete this. I can say that I'm targeting this client. So basically I can say if right, this would be the thing that I want to do, and within this, I say if this is not now, or white space, then I'm going to call the receive message on the client side. We don't have it yet, but we're going to work on that soon. So we're going to targeting by the connection ID. So whichever client that has this connection ID is going to receive a message, okay? And I need to tell from which user the message has been sent, and I need to tell it from which connection ID this message is sent. And then I provide this message. Now I need to define this receive message method. So I need to go to our contract, and then I need to go to iChatClient. And over here, I'm gonna say task receive message, and I have, from user ID, from connected, connection ID, and message. Okay, now I'm gonna come back, and the red squiggly line is gone. Now, what I need to do is to go back to the client side, which is our home component. And then scroll down. I now need to implement the receive message method here. So it always try to automatically generate code for me. This time I'm not gonna take it. I'm gonna take partially, and then I'm gonna just delete this. And so from user ID, the signature should be consistent with the server side. So from connection ID, and then the message. So now I need to make sure that the from connection ID is not now, because I need to find the from user, and I'm gonna use the connection ID to find it. Okay, if the from user is not now, then from user.messages, let's take a look at the message, the code that is generated. Yeah, I'm trying to add this chat message to the from user. That's correct behavior. So we have from user ID, and the to user ID needs to be equal to this user ID. So this user ID is, if you don't remember, it's actually created right here when the user provides username. And the Unread or Unread should be equals to 2, which is the default value. So we don't need to do anything here. Okay, so we implemented the receive message. Now we go on to the next step, which is to actually use the component that we just created. So we created a chat component, and we gotta use it right here. So I'm gonna use it above the system message. Well, it's automatically generate code for me again. So I'm gonna accept it, and then I'm gonna see whether it works for me or not. Well, it says malformatted tag helper. Well, let's actually double check. So we have from user ID and to user. Let's don't worry about it for now. We're gonna work on that later. Connected users, which equals to this, and hub connection equals to hub connection. So it says that it doesn't have a hub connection. Is it because we didn't actually keep the hub connection? Right, we didn't keep the hub connection. We do need to keep the connection. Over here, I'm going to, should I have it here or on the top? Yeah, maybe I should have it on the top. And I need to have a hub connection. I can use a question mark over here. And then down here, I can remove this var. So I have this hub connection, and then I assign it right here. So here, I need to have a user. For that user, I can create another variable here. And I'm gonna say connected user, and this is the to user. Or if we want to make it even more obvious, I'm gonna call it target user. And I'm gonna assign this target user to the to user. I'm gonna move this. So what is actually going on here? This is found a malformatted tag helper. Tag helpers must have a start and end tag. Oh, okay, so it doesn't actually finish it. Okay, so good. So we have this chat component, but this target user is always null. So we need to figure out how to solve this problem. This target user should be assigned when I, as a user, click on one of the users in the user list. Okay? And the user list is right here. So let's go to this connected user component, which means that when I click on this table row here, I need to do something. So I'm going to say onClick, and then, so I'm going to trigger a method, and I'm going to call it select user, and I'm going to pass in the user.connection ID. Okay, I think something wrong is because this angular bracket is not supposed to be there, it's supposed to be here. So now we have the select user to implement. So we can go down over here, and we can say private void select user, and then connection ID. Okay, and now I need to find the target user. So I'm gonna say I'm gonna look into the connected users, and based on the question mark here. Okay, so based on this lambda expression, I need to get my target user, and then I'm gonna say target user message. I'm gonna add the chat message, and then I'm going to pass this target user to outside. Right, so it's already generated the code for me, so I'm going to accept it. So if target user is not now, then I'm going to have to create another parameter here. So parameter, and then this is a public property, and it has to be an event callback. And the thing that is passed back is connected user, right? And then here I'm going to say on user selected. Right, corresponds to this one. And yeah, so I think we can do this. If we want to use a wait, we can use a wait, but I think we don't have to. Well, if we want to use a wait, we're going to do this. And then over here, we do a wait. And if we look at here, we can use async and a wait like this. All right, so now we need to have this in the parent component. We need to implement the on user selected. Okay, so which happens right here. So I'm going to say on user selected, and I'm going to say on user selected. Copy this method in the clipboard, and then when the user is selected, so on user selected, private, okay. And then the connected user is the target user, right? This is the target user, or let's call it to user. And now this dot target user equals to user. Now once I have this target user is going to be passed to the chat component, right? And then if we go into the chat component, you can see that if the to user, which is the target user, is not now, and we do have the connected users, then it's going to display everything. We didn't register this method yet. Over here, we're going to have receive message. So this one takes 3 parameters, I believe. Okay, and come over here. Yes, 3 parameters. 1, 2, 3. All of them are strings. Okay, so now I think we're good. And let's run it. Okay, so let's create 2 different clients, and again, one user on the left hand side, another user on the right hand side. I'm gonna click on this one, and I'm gonna say hello Tim. But on this side, I'm gonna click on Frank, and I see this message now. Continue saying how are you, and I see how are you popping up right here. That's good. And I'm gonna say I'm good. Hi Frank. And I received this message as well. So that's really, really good. I think I forgot to actually apply some CSS on these messages. So let's work on that. And perhaps I'm going to have an avatar for each one of them. So let's go to the chat component here. Let's actually create a new item. And over here, I'm going to say CSS and choose style sheet. And here, I'm going to say chat component dot razor. So this is CSS isolation. You can see this is grouped, automatically grouped together with the component. And over here, I'm going to have, remember, we have a message item, CSS class that we need to implement. I'm going to say background color, and maybe we can use sky blue, and border radius. So border radius. I'm going to say for maybe 5 px, 5 pixels. And margin bottom, I'm going to create a margin at the bottom. And I have 5 pixels as well. And also I'm going to have a padding for 5 pixels. And also let's go into the www root folder. I'm going to create a folder. And inside this folder is going to be images. So I'm going to come over here and paste this avatar. See, this is just a messenger kind of avatar icon, like a generic icon. And now I can go to my chat component, and I'm going to add the avatar icon over here on the top. So image source equals to /images /avatar, and the alternative message is just avatar. And class over here, we can say run it circle, and we need to make sure it has a width which is 40 pixels and a height of for the pixels as well. Now let's see whether this works or not. Let's run it again. We have one client on the left, another client on the right, and this is going to be Tim, and this is going to be Jim. And I'm saying, hi Jim. And so we have sky blue, which looks okay. And we have this circle icon over here, right? What's up? Not much. Another thing I want to change is, you notice that the send button is not placed correctly. So, which is right here. We have this input element and we have a button afterwards. I want them to be connected like side by side. So what I can do is to have another div, right? And inside the div, I can say class is input group. So with this, I can group them together. So let's see whether this works or not. Moving this inside and then stop. Well, I guess I can use hard reload. Anyways, we can restart the application. So again, I'm going to create two clients side by side. So James and Will. So hello. So yeah, so now you can see I have this input box and this send button kind of connected together side by side, and that's much better. And I can receive message. I can also send message from here. So I'm gonna say hello James. Well, I guess my message is wrong here. So I should say hello Will, but anyways, it should be something like this, and it's okay. I just forgot my name. And I think that's all for this part of the video, and we're moving on to the next one from next lesson. In this part of the video, we are going to work on message notifications. Message notification actually includes, in my idea, includes two different parts. One is a sound notification. The other one is a visual notification. So for example, here, I want to talk to Tom, which is on the right hand side. And I say, hi Tom. Tom on the right hand side doesn't know about the existence of the message, right? Unless he clicks on this icon. One of the first things I want to show is a unread message icon here. So it shows the number of unread message, right? At least we need to have that, and then we can think about playing a sound. But first thing first, I think this message box should be on the left hand side, and then we have the user list on the right hand side. And one thing I want to show you is, at least we want to test one functionality that we forgot to test, which is the disconnection. If I disconnect the right hand side, take the connection on the right hand side away from the server, then this should disappear, right? Because on the right hand side from the system message, I know that the right hand side is Tom. If I close this browser, the SignalR channel should be disconnected. Then over here on the left hand side, this Tom should disappear. Let's make sure it works like that. So I'm closing this and it disappeared. That's great. It's just that this window is not disappearing. Well, I guess that's fine. You're just not sending to anyone. So that's not something I'm too concerned about. The first thing, I'm going to move this around. So let's go to home. I don't like the message, the main area on the left hand side. I want the main area to be on the left hand side. I don't want it to be on the right hand side. And also I want to make it a little bit bigger. So this one is 9 and this is 3. I'm going to move this to the top, which is going to show it on the left hand side. Okay, so now let's work on the notification. First thing first, we want to show a visual notification, and that has to be displayed right here in the connected user component, right? Beside the username, the table cell is actually used for that purpose. So how do we display the message? First of all, we need to get the unread message count. We can come to over here and we can say var unread. Well, this is not enough. This first of all, this is supposed to be unread. So unread equals to true. And at the same time, I said that it's not enough because you have a from user and you have a to user, right? Remember that for each connected user, let's actually go here. We have this messages, and for each message, We have from user and to user. So what does this mean? Let's go back over here. This is a list of messages that is between the from user and the to user. So when we try to display the unread message, we don't want to show the message that is actually sent from the logon user. So let's try to make this clear. And I know it's confusing, this concept. So I, as a logon user, right? For example, I'm Frank. I log on to the chat application. I provide my username, Frank. I click on submit. And then now I am sending message as Frank, let's say to Tom. So when I send to Tom, that message is also stored as part of Tom's message list, right? And then Tom is going to send a message to me. And then I'm going to reply that message. So it's a list of messages that is between me and Tom. When I see the notification, right, the unread message count, I don't want to count my message. And therefore, here, I need to say that m.fromUserID, it is not this.logonUserID, right? So this makes sure that it's only counting Tom's messages, not my messages. Now I have this unread message count. I can display it right here. First of all, and make sure that unread message count is greater than 0. And then I'm going to use a div, and I'm going to use a class. I'm going to say unread indicator. So I'm going to create the CSS class later, but here I'm going to display the number. And for this class, again, I'm going to create a new item. So this is again a style sheet, and the name has to be the same as the component name. And this is connected users component.razor. And this is going to be automatically grouped with this. So this is CSS isolation. So here we have a class, and it generated this for me. I don't know according to what it does this, but I'm going to write myself. I'm going to actually copy and paste the code that I prepared over here. So you can see this is an in block, right, inline block, and I have 24 pixels. I don't want it to be too big, and the background color is red. This is just an unread message, that's why it's red. And the for color, which is the text color, that's white. And then I have font size, weight, text line, of course, is center, and line weight is 24 pixels. And then I have border radius. The border radius 50%, which means that this is going to be a circle. Okay, and then I have a little bit of shadow like this, which makes it look much better. And this code is actually generated by AI, so Copilot. So in Copilot, you can describe what you want, and it's going to give you the code. So you don't have to always code everything yourself with the AI. All right, so I have this, and I hope this AI generated code is going to work for me pretty well. And I believe this is enough to show the unread message count. And let's run it again. All right, we have one client, another client, and let's actually create 3. So this one is going to be on top left, going to be on bottom left, and this one, let's move it over to the top right. Okay, so this is me, this is Tom, something's wrong here. Okay, so this is Jim, and I'm going to talk to Tom. I'm going to say, hi Tom, and now you can see that there is a visual notification here. It tells me that I have one unread message. This is Frank, and then I say, how are you? I have 3. So now I'm going to click on either this icon or anywhere in this row. It's going to open it up, right? And I'm going to reply the message and say, hi Frank, and then Frank has this. But then the problem is this number is just going to keep going up. So we need to fix that problem. So one way we can remove this number or remove this notification is that if I click on this, right? So if I switch to Jim and then I come back to Frank, immediately this number should be removed. that's one place that I need to add some logic. Another one is if I reply the message and then this one displays too, but then the message is also displayed here, right? So in this case, I think there are many ways to do this, but if I reply a message and click on send, right now this should be cleared, right? So there are two places. So first one is right here. Let's stop debugging. The first one is right here in the connected users component. So when this table row is clicked on, which is select user right here, right? So when this select user method is executed, what I want to do here is that I'm going to say target user dot messages dot for each, okay? So for each message, and I'm going to say unread is false. So this means that I'm going to loop through the messages, and for each one of them, I'm going to say all of the messages are already read. So this is the logic here. And the other one is in the chat message component here. So when the send message method is called, which is right here, I need to let the parent component know that I'm sending a message to another user, and then the parent component can clear the unread message count for me. And for that, I need to create an event callback. So I can say parameter and then prop and event callback. So here I'm saying I'm sending to a target user. So I can say this event callback is called onMessage sent, and then go here at the very bottom. I can say onMessage sent and invoke async, and then I just provide the target user, which is toUser.userID. So I can do that, and then I can await it. Okay, and then from the parent component, which is the home component right here, I can then use this event callback. I say onMessage sent, and then I also call it the same name, and I go down over here, and I say private void onMessage sent, and this is the from user ID, to user ID, right? So what should I do? I need to tell the connect users component to clear the message count for this particular user. So I can go to this connected users component, and I can actually create a public method for myself. So I can say public void clear unread message count, and I say string user ID, and then I say this dot connected users dot where x goes to x user ID equals user ID, and I'm gonna say for each, and I'm gonna say first or default, and it's Visual Studio actually implemented this code for me, and I'm gonna add a question mark here. So basically it says first or default user ID equals this user ID. Basically I'm getting the user ID, and then I'm going to each one of those messages and I set unread false. So this clears the unread message count. And because this is not an event handler, so therefore I need to do a state has changed method here. This will help me to clear this count, and therefore this will be gone. So I need to trigger this clear unread message from my home component here. So how do I do that? I have to refer to connect user component, right? And to do that, I can do a ref, the connected user component, and I need to declare this. So I can declare it on the bottom or anywhere. Connected users component, make this one capitalized, and question mark, and then I'm gonna go over here. Well, this actually needs to be moved to the top because this is a event handler. These three are all event handlers are showing on the top. This is just something I want to do. You can have your own convention. So onMessage sent, then I have the toUser, and then I grab this connected users component, right? If it has a value, and then I can say clear unread message, and I provide the toUser ID. All right. I hope this one works to clear the message count. And let's give it a try. Okay, let's at least have two clients talking to each other. And this is going to be my name. This is going to be Will. And I click on Will. I say, hi, Will. And it shows a message count. And I say, hello. And then here it says, hello, Frank. Right? And I have a message over here. I don't have to click on it because the message is already displayed for me. And I say, how are you? And hopefully this time this is cleared. So I'm going to click on the send button. Now it's cleared. That's good. Give myself a thumb up. All right, come over here and I say, so Frank says, how are you? And I say, I'm good. So I'm saying, are you coming? I have two messages. And then as soon as I send this message and say, yes, see, this is gone. And that's exactly what we want. All right, so that's enough for this part of the video. We'll continue to the next one. In the previous video, we have created this unread message counter, which works and it looks pretty cool, but there is a potential issue. So let's move this up and let me actually create another client. Okay, I'm going to move it over here and then I'm going to enter the name and watch the unread message count. I'm going to click on submit and all of a sudden this number is gone. So that's one of the problem. And let's continue our dialogue here. So you see the message over here, right? Becomes 2. I type in something, it becomes 3. So this is correct because I'm chatting with Will and this is Will. So this is a correct location, but watch this. I'm going to close the browser, which disconnects the SignalR connection. And then all of a sudden, well, I guess this is normal because I disconnect the connection for that particular conversation as well. So I don't think that's a correct demonstration. So let's say the name is Jim. So here, if Will and Frank is continuing the conversation, okay, and so Frank talks to Will and saying whatever the message is. Now, if I disconnect this window, watch the unread message. See, it disappears. So why is that? Let's close these windows, stop the debugging. That is, whenever there is a user connecting to a user hub or disconnect from a user hub, we trigger this update user list. And we directly just assign these users to the connected users of the client. So this is the home.razor. This is the client file. So this user comes from the server. Remember that the user comes from the server doesn't actually contain any messages, right? Because look at the server right here. We, from no place, we actually store the message, right? The user, this connected user, is only affected when the user connects, and there's no message when the user connects. And when the user disconnects, again, there's no message when the user disconnects. So basically, in this user list, there is no messages. We are not storing messages on the server side. In fact, you can create another class. You don't have to use a connected user class. You can create another class, and in that new class, you don't need the messages. You just need the 3 other properties. Although now we're sharing the same class, but on the server side, we don't care about the messages. So let's close this. So because of that, whenever there is a user that joins, we're updating all of the clients with the server-side user list, which is going to remove the conversations between existing users. And same thing here. If I disconnect, I'm going to remove a user from the connected user list. And then over here, we update the entire user list to notify them this changed user list. And then from the client side, we just directly assign this to the connected users. So that means that the connected user list will lose all of the messages. So we need to fix this issue. So remember, this issue only happens when there is a user that connects to a hub or disconnect from a hub. So because of this, we can easily fix the problem. So what we can do is, first of all, we're going to create a dictionary of existing users. So I'm going to say existing users dictionary, and I'm going to say connected users to dictionary, and I'm not sure whether this is correct. So if this is empty, then we can use a empty string. Okay, that removes the squeaky line there. And then what we are going to do is we are going to loop through the users, and we need to find all of the new users. That's the reason why we created a dictionary, right? Because we can easily use the dictionary to identify the new users. So I'm going to do a for each loop. So I'm going to accept the suggested code. So here it's trying to use the dictionary to see whether it contains the user's connection ID. And if it does contains, that means, well, sorry, if it doesn't contains, that means the user is a new user. So we're going to add that user over here. When we do it this way, it's not going to affect the existing users. So this is add new users. And then we're going to work on removing, I'm going to say remove disconnected users. So I'm going to accept this and see whether this makes sense or not. No, I don't want to get the disconnected users. I want to refresh the connected users by finding all of the users that are connected. So I'm going to say connected users dot where, and then let me accept this and then double check. Move this to the next line where users dot any in the new users list, new user goes to new user equals connection. So this way, it's finding all of the existing users that is also inside this list. So it's kind of doing an intersect operation. And then the result of this is basically the existing user excluding the disconnected users. So again, this is not going to affect the existing users that are still connected. And then we don't need this anymore. So this should fix the problem. And let's run this to test it. Let's have 4 different users and let's start having conversation. Okay, now if I disconnect the last one, you can see that the user is removed, but notification is still here, and that's great. Okay, let's continue trying. This is going to talk to Frank. Hi, Frank. So this is James, and I'm going to click on James, and I receive the message. And I say, hi, James, where are you? Says I am here. Now from Will, I have this como está thing, and then I'm gonna say estoy bien. And now I have a notification here from James, and if I disconnect Will, it shouldn't affect James, and that's great. It's still working. The error message count is still here, so that's great. And that finishes this part of the lesson. We'll continue into the next one. Okay, welcome back. So in this lesson, we are going to talk about the notification sound. So here, you can see that if I'm chatting with any user, I say, hi, James. You know, we do see this visual notification, but I also want to hear a sound. So how do we do that? Well, we can use JavaScript to play the sound. And for that, we need to use JS runtime inside the Blazor in order to trigger the JavaScript. So go ahead and implement that. Let's again go to www.root. This is where we store static resources. So including JavaScript. So here I'm going to create a folder first, and I'm going to call it script. And then I'm going to create a JavaScript. Well, it's right here. And I'm going to call it sound. Actually, I need to rename it to lowercase because this is the typical convention for JavaScript naming. Now here I can say I'm adding a method for window, and I can say play sound equals to function, and then this is the sound file path. And then over here I can declare a variable. This equals to a new audio file. And then I can say play this audio file. Now, where's the audio file? We're going to add another folder, and we can say sounds. So we can have different notification sound, but for the development purpose over here, we're going to create only one notification, which is this notification.wave. Now, where should we trigger this? Where should we trigger this play sound JavaScript? Well, when we receive a message from the client side, obviously. Where do we receive a message? Well, inside the home.razor, we have a receive message function, and this is being called on the server side when a message is forwarded, is being forwarded. Okay, so here we can trigger that JavaScript. So in order to trigger the JavaScript, first of all, we need to go to the top and inject. So this is dependency injection. We're going to inject the IJS runtime, and then we have this JS runtime we can use. This is the instance, and then we scroll down to receive message, and then just about here we can say JS runtime dot invoke async. Here we can trigger the JavaScript to invoke void async, because we don't need to get a return value. It doesn't have a return value. So which JavaScript function do we trigger? We're going to trigger the playSound function. And then the second parameter is the parameter to this JavaScript function here, which is the sound pass. And that is /sound/notification.wave. And this is a async method. I can do this, and this one I can use task. All right, so we have this JavaScript runtime doing our work, and we have the JavaScript itself, and we have the sound, but we need to include the sound.js. We need to include it in the main project. This is the main Blazor project, and this is the root component. And you can see that here we have JavaScript included, so we can include that just above this. So script, and then we can point to scripts/sound.js. Okay, so this should work. Let's give it a try. We have an error here, so there's this semicolon that we forgot to add, and let's try again. Okay, so we have one client, have some other client. All right, we have 4 clients, and let's provide user information for each one of them, and let's try to talk to Christine. So I'm gonna say, hello Christine, long time no see. And now you can hear the sound notification. If I'm Christine, I'm going to click on this and say, hi Frank, how are you? And I hit enter. I also hear a sound here. And Chris can talk to Christine. Say, hi Christine. And then Christine, check that is Chris sending a message. So she doesn't care about Chris. And she wants to talk to Tim as well. So I'm gonna say, Tim, did you check in the code? And then Tim says, yes, I did. And then Christine says, where is it? I don't see it. So now all of a sudden Chris says, I removed Tim's code. And then Christine goes to Chris and sees this. And then Christine says, why? Okay, so we have a fully function chat application, although still pretty simple, but you can see that with the SignalR classes, which is basically very simple classes, just 2 classes, the hop connection and the hop class. With these 2 classes, you can create a real-time chat application just as simple as this. And we're talking to each other without any problems. The SignalR classes, these 2 classes, has other functionalities. For example, you can group users together, and then you can send a message toward the whole group, right? Or you can just send to everybody. You can use clients.all to send to everybody, or you can send to a particular group. So that's because that's a very common use case. Most chat applications allow users to create groups. We just have a simple application that allows all of the employees in the company talk to each other, and there are no groups. But if you want to add, you can easily add those functionalities yourself. And I hope this course gets you started with creating SignalR enabled application. Your chat application is not the only choice for using SignalR. As a matter of fact, Blazor server is completely based on SignalR channel, right? Almost completely based on SignalR channel. It is because of SignalR channel, Blazor server becomes interactive. Right? It's an interactive application instead of based on HTTP request and response. Therefore, you can see that SignalR application and those two classes are powerful classes. Again, I hope this course gets you started with SignalR application. If you enjoyed this course, please give me a like and subscribe to my channel so that you don't miss any free videos like this in the future.